I think that the best thing that the state has going for it is this commonly held belief that it protects its citizens. And this is probably the biggest stumbling block, this notion that the state actually protects its citizens. This is just a theory, and rational discourse consists of putting theories to the test, exposing them to the scientific method. A great example of how the state is supposed to protect one against political violence is the Transportation Security Administration. I linked to a story where that college student was able to sneak past box cutters into an airplane, and he was able to get into somewhere that the public wasn't supposed to go, if I recall. He placed the box cutter there just to show how bad security was. Also, I linked to an article where a TSA official was able to slip a mock bomb past security, even after calling in advance to an airport in Tampa, Florida, that they were going to try to slip a bomb through. Also, it was revealed that these types of tests go on all the time in that same article, and that the TSA fails more often than it passes. So at a bare minimum, we can say that the TSA fails at least 51% of the time, probably more. And so given that a terrorist who wishes to hijack an airplane will not call in advance, we can quite fairly assume that at least 51% of all attempted hijacking since 2003 have succeeded. All 0 of them. The state does not protect us in this regard, and despite not being able to pass a majority of simple bomb tests, our Congress thought that the banning of liquids on an airplane was a relevant measure. The TSA can't even deal with basic attacks. Telling the TSA to ban liquids would be like telling a sprinter who's 50 pounds overweight to work on his form. Okay, I mean, I remember a story. There was a woman who got lost at the Orange County Airport and accidentally got to her gate without going through security. Okay, Mrs. Magoo, just aimlessly wandering around, got past security. This isn't James Bond stuff we're dealing with, and given how demonstrably ineffectual the state is at protecting people at airports, which have been the focus of national attention, do you think the state does a better or worse job at protecting less high-profile targets? Power plants, sewage systems, water purification systems, bridges, rail lines, power lines, and transformers, those round cylinder circle oil containers. It really only takes a few seconds of thought to realize that a large population of highly motivated terrorists could do a lot of damage without much effort. We have this mental image of a sea of destruction and destroyers just waiting to prey upon us, and that it is being held back by the state. This is just demonstrably not true. And this is also not borne out by historical examples of prepared anarchy. The western United States territories were actually less violent than the eastern city on a per capita basis, with events like the Johnson County Water War and the showdown at the OK Corral being blown all out of proportion. Another example would be the years 1681 and 1690 in Pennsylvania, when for all intents and purposes the colony had no central government. And of course, nothing really bad happened, okay? Because people solve problems without a central authority all the time. In Argentina, there was a period where managers and owners of factories all across the country just up and left or were kicked out as a result of some political situation, I forget. And so you ended up with the factory workers just running the factory. They just found themselves running the factories, setting wages and hours and all that stuff. And the factories worked fine because people aren't selfish sheep. They know that the reason food ends up on their plate is because they produce something. Okay, humans evolved from surviving in the wild, and people who don't even know the capital of the U.S. can organize in this way. And really, when was the last time America fought a genuine war of defense? During World War II, Nazi Germany couldn't even conquer Britain at the height of its power. And it's not like Risk, where you get more points for conquering more land. So Germany wasn't going to go much further after they conquered the Soviet Union. And Japan, don't even make me laugh, Vietnam, Korea, the Latin American wars, not for defense. And besides, those are all wars against other states. And yes, the only argument for states seems to be that we need one to protect us from another state, if it can even be called protecting. But if you follow the money, what you will find is that certain industries make a killing on war, and America's involvement in World War I was basically manufactured by bankers who had made more loans to the Entente powers than to the Central powers. In order to collect on the loans, France and Britain had to win, but in 1917 were really close to losing, which is why America had to be brought in on the side of the Allies. And this Iraq war, as we all know, is just a train wreck. There are more contractors in Iraq right now than there are soldiers. Okay, defense contractors who are making many multiples of their peacetime profits through the war racket. I'll put a little link to a fine old article on the war racket. And the reason industries make so much money during war is that the state isn't spending its own money, so it's willing to overpay for war material and services, resulting in unnatural profits, and the profits are paid by the taxpayer. Okay, war is the excuse for these profits, and this is only possible with a state, and clearly doesn't protect the citizens. Now, one good way to verify this, that war is a racket and just an excuse to fleece the taxpayer for obscene war profits, is to look at America's behavior. If this were true, and war was a racket, then the U.S. should go to war after countries who can't do any major damage to America's economy or the interests that advocated the war. So the U.S. will never cook up a war against nuclear power. Okay? It also won't wage wars with countries that have a lot of soft power, like Saudi Arabia. So even though most of the 9/11 hijackers came from Saudi Arabia, the Saudis are relatively safe because they could really damage the U.S. economy and make war with them unprofitable. Afghanistan is a fine nation to attack since Afghanistan has no real way to fight back. Syria also would have been a good choice, but since Osama was willing to take credit for 9/11, it was easier to make a case for a war against the Taliban. And Iraq was also easy to demonize due to the first war. These wars provide immense profits to the war industries, but did little to protect the American public. Because if the government really was interested in protecting us, it would have invaded Saudi Arabia, but it didn't, because that would have hurt their bottom line. If this war on terror really was as important as George Bush says it is, it would be worth it to invade Saudi Arabia and take a hit on the bottom line. If it's worth a war, it's worth the economic consequences of invading Saudi Arabia. But as we can see from the performance of the TSA, we're not in any real danger, and wars over there are obviously not to protect us because there's nothing to protect us from, therefore the profit. Also, the war in Iraq prevented the expansion of the petro-euro, but I don't think I need to go into any more stuff about how this war is all about profit. The principle is that the state is not interested in protecting its citizens. It does not protect its citizens from terrorists. It is waging wars against countries that never threatened us and is actually making us less safe. And if you're afraid of a private army, good grief, over half the foreign forces in Iraq are private, and the CIA outsources 70% of its intelligence gathering. We have private armies now. The only difference is that in anarchy, the private armies wouldn't get state funding, and so you wouldn't be incentivized to wage pointless wars in pointless countries. If they tried to tax you, if the private armies tried to tax you without your consent, they would have competition from more or less equally sized private armies. The state has no such real competition. They exist only because the state pays them to exist. And whenever a private army forms that the state doesn't want, okay, it just becomes a no-go zone anyway. And if you look at examples of prepared anarchy, you see that you don't get private armies running around. You get people behaving very much like they behave in a state. Okay, so to recap, the state does not protect you against small-scale crime and lone gunman crime better than private services would. The state does not protect you against political violence and terrorism. The state does not protect you against warlords, and the state's wars with other countries are contrived affairs to fleece the taxpayer. Believing a band of quasi-elected killers and corporatists have any desire to protect you or me is a notion silly on its face. We need to stop running to the lions